Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate Day number 1175, 1175, Sunday, June the 28th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, yeah, obviously I'm having serious issues with my uploads, but I'm now convinced 100% the issue is with my service provider internet, because it's not just YouTube videos. I always would have a situation where I'd lose connection for a minute or two, sometimes a half an hour. I figured maybe they're just doing a backup or something, but now it's this last week I'm just losing connection all the time. In fact, my internet's out right now. Been out for about an hour or two. Even though my icon, or when I click on my connection, will show I'm connected, but I have no internet. So it's something going on with my modem or their equipment or something. So there's an issue, so I got to get Spectrum out here to take a look at it as soon as I can. That's kind of hard to do for me because the demands of my job make it very difficult for me to come home to meet a tech or whatever. But it's just a frustration that I'm having to work through. So I apologize, but I'll do my very best. I do a video every day. I'll upload them. Maybe they'll upload, maybe they won't. I try to re-upload them. Most of the time that works. Sometimes it doesn't. But for the next probably week or so, 2 weeks, until I can get this solved, expect there to be issues. So don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. Consider ourselves lucky if the upload occurs. Okay, so obviously limited in the research I could do because my internet's down. But I did want to focus on some research I'd done yesterday, because I'm still, digging into this most recent deal with the recent notes, the handwritten notes from Peter's been stroking us, and people are still looking at that and trying to figure out when are the notes from, all that sort of thing. What do those notes tell us? There's a lot more. It's not so much the notes themselves, what they say. We pretty much looked at that. I'll go through that again, but there's other questions that need to be looked at. So, and that's going to require more information. So anyway, I'm going to talk about that mostly, but just a couple things here. First, I guess many of you, well, know how many of you have seen it or know about this, but yesterday we learned that Showtime is going to be doing an airing of a 2-part miniseries, which is based on Jimmy the Weasel's book, A Higher Loyalty. The miniseries is going to be called The Comey Rule. It will be highly critical of Trump while justifying Comey's conduct during his tenure. Now, this is going to air September 27th and 28th of this upcoming year. In other words, about a month and a half before the election. It's a hit piece on Trump, designed to have some impact on the election. Jeff Daniels, the big Trump hater Jeff Daniels, is going to star as Jimmy the Weasel Comey. Now, there's a kind of a backstory to this, which is that this had been in the works for quite some time. There had been issues with it. Then when they finally got the issues worked out, the date for it to air was going to be after the election. So this sent the guy who was developing it or writing it or producing it or whatever, sent him into fits. So then there was a lot of negotiations and a lot of things going on, and they finally were able to get it moved up so that it would air before the 2020 November election. So there you go. Comey the Weasel, Jimmy the Weasel, his 2-part miniseries, which will be coming out, airing September 27th and 28th, based on his book, The Higher Loyalty. It will be called The Comey Rule. Now, I guess my thoughts on this are, wait a minute, Barr has suggested multiple times that Durham will have the meat and potatoes of his investigation wrapped up by the end of the summer, which would suggest to me that it's very likely that Comey will have already been indicted by the time this airs. Whether or not he'll actually be in custody or in jail, I don't know. Because, it's possible that he could be indicted and then he could be out of jail, he'd be given a bond, he would pay his bond, and he would be out of jail pending his hearings. But it's possible that he could also be in jail Um, Certainly he would have the money to pay any bond. Of all the characters in this plot, other than Obama, he's probably the wealthiest one. These other guys like McCabe, Strzok, Page, and those people, they would have fairly limited funds. They're not necessarily a multi millionaires, whereas Comey is. So he could probably pay a pretty high bail. The rest of these characters, maybe not. But it's very likely, like I said, that if this thing airs at the end of September, if what Barr is telling us is correct, we can certainly assume that Comey is going to be one of the key people that will be indicted. I can imagine that Comey would not be indicted on multiple counts. So we'll just have to wait and see how all this shakes out, whether or not Comey will be in jail or will have already been indicted, if this thing would even air. Because you got to wonder if this is scheduled to air September 27th, 28th, but if Comey is indicted, a week or two or a month before that, will they still run it? They probably would. They probably would. So that's something to pay attention to. But now let's go ahead and dig in a little bit to this most recent release of the notes from Peter's Been Stroking Us, the handwritten notes discovered by Jeff Jensen, U.S. Attorney from Missouri, who's working on the Flynn case, provided to the DOJ, who then provided it to the court. Along with, there's obviously a lot of things that Jensen has provided to the court, which Sullivan is sitting on, which we haven't had access to and hasn't been released to the public. Keep that in mind. But anyway, looking over at Catherine Herridge's Twitter feed, she's questioning the date of these notes. The original story that was written, stories I should say, that were written the day of the release of these suggests that Jeff Jensen believed that the notes were written on either the 3rd, the 4th, or the 5th. And so for a couple days there, it's like, well, wait a minute, if the notes are written on the 3rd or the 4th, then they're notes written before the meeting happened, which meant it couldn't be about the January 5th meeting. It would have to be notes about another meeting. But Attorney General Barr was just on a podcast with Ted Cruz. And in that, this issue was brought up, and Barr said, no, we believe the notes are about the meeting on the 5th. So it appears that that's where it stands now. Barr believes that the Peter's Been Stroking Us notes were written about the meeting on the January 5th. So the idea that they were written on the 3rd or the 4th, which would mean there had to be another meeting. It appears that that's probably not true, at least where it stands now. A.G. Barr believes the notes were written about the meeting that took place on the 5th in the Oval Office with at one point Obama and Biden, Clapper, Comey, Brennan, Rice, Yates, and then at some point Obama tells everyone to leave except for Yates and Comey. And that is apparently where the story is now. But we have some other information that Catherine Herridge has dug up. And they are other notes from Peter's Been Stroking Us. And these notes show that on January the 4th of 2017, Peter's Been Stroking Us, Lisa Page, and General Counsel of the FBI, James Baker, searched for Logan Act Statute 18-USC 953. So the day before the meeting, Strzok, Page, and Baker are searching for the Logan Act statute on some government database, 18 U.S.C. 1953. Then, following that, and I'm not sure the date of this, but following that, Peter's Been Stroking Us then writes in a text in a very braggadocious manner the following. It says, quote, "And because I am so awesome, CRS, and because I am so awesome, CRS piece on the Logan Act from 2015, all the legislative history they cite does not involve incoming administrations. And because I Am So Awesome, CRS piece on the Logan Act from 2015, all the legislative history they cite does not involve incoming administrations. So what is he probably talking about here? Well, keep in mind the Logan Act refers to private individuals, negotiating or having contacts with foreign governments in issues where it might be they're trying to conduct foreign policy or affect foreign policy, make promises or whatever, conducting foreign relations in an unauthorized fashion because they're not a legitimate member of a government or administration or private citizen. So it appears that what Peter's been stroking us is suggesting here that it's okay to look into Flynn because the Logan Act does not involve incoming administrations, only administrations who are actually now sworn in and the actual administration, not leading up to or coming into. Now, that, of course, is ridiculous if that is what he's suggesting. Because all administrations, once the election is over, and you have that period between the first week in November, the first Tuesday in November, and Inauguration Day, in that transition period, all of the foreign policies advisors, especially the incoming National Security Advisor, begins having consultations and communications with the foreign ambassadors and things like that, which is exactly what Flynn was doing. But it appears that Peter's been stroking us is trying to read something else into it. And of course, in this particular case, it looks like he's patting himself on the back as being the person who discovers this Logan Act. Because he says, quote, "And because I am so awesome," CRS piece on the Logan Act from 2015, all the legislative history they cite does not involve incoming administrations. And because I am so awesome. He's making it sound like he is awesome because he discovered that the Logan Act does not apply to incoming administrations, despite the fact that anybody with half a brain knows that every administration begins consulting with ambassadors and foreign people during the transition period. That's what the transition period is. It's for the new people to get acquainted so that once they are sworn in, they know what the hell's going on day one. They've already had some communications. They've already touched base. Now they're not authorized to make any policy decisions, but they can certainly discuss the parameters and things like that may be up for debate once they are in their official position. So this is all very strange to me. And again, that's why there needs to be more questions asked of Peter's been stroking us and Luce Lisa Page and a lot of these people, McCord, the whole group of them, the whole small group, Comey, they all need to be set down and grilled over exactly what's going on here with these discussions. But we also had the senior Department of Justice official Mary McCord, who we now know is a deep state coup operative, still working on the coup. Deep state DOJ official Mary McCord testified under oath that she was briefed on the Flynn case on January the 3rd, 2017. That would be one day before these notes here from Peter's been stroking us. Not the newly released notes, but the notes that Catherine Herridge is talking about that she discovered. Now that's interesting because that would mean that a senior DOJ official, Mary McCord, is testifying that she was briefed on the Flynn case on January the 3rd. But Sally Yates says that the first she heard of it was on January the 5th in that meeting, and she was taken aback by this. So in other words, the number 2 person at the DOJ, Sally Yates, is not hearing about it until January the 5th, but 2 days before that, a lower ranking DOJ official, Mary McCord, is getting briefed. And that briefing apparently was done by McCabe. So McCabe knew before the 5th. He was not in that meeting. Now, if in fact these notes are, as Barr says, from January 5th, and the notes are handwritten notes from Peter's been stroking us, and no one at this time has suggested that he was in that meeting. There's no one at this point has named Peter's been stroking us as being in that meeting. That tells us one obvious thing. That Peter's been stroking us is taking notes, but he's not taking notes from being in that meeting. Someone else is talking and telling Peter's been stroking us what went down in the meeting, and you can tell by looking at his shorthand writing and scribble that he's writing this down as someone is talking, because he wasn't in the meeting. So someone's clearly telling him what happened in the meeting. And who would that be? Well, that would obviously be Jimmy the Weasel. He was the FBI guy in the room. There was no other FBI guy in the room. It was Brennan and Clapper, but they wouldn't be debriefing Strzok on the meeting. Yates wouldn't be debriefing him. Rice wouldn't be debriefing him. It had to be Comey debriefing Strzok, telling him what went down in the meeting. So keep this in mind, very important. It's Comey that's telling Peter's been stroking us what happened. And that is what Strzok is writing down in his shorthand notes. Strzok wasn't a first-hand witness. Comey is telling him what happened. It's very important to keep in mind. And what happened after the meeting? Of course, Susan Rice writes the Cover Our Ass letter. She writes a letter to cover Obama's ass and hers. And it appears when you look at these notes and look at the things that were said and what Comey is telling Strzok went down, it appears that these notes that Comey, this information that Comey's giving Peter's been stroking us, were done for the purpose of Comey covering his ass. Peter's been stroking us' handwritten notes were Comey's cover your ass letter. So, of course, we learned from these notes, and keep in mind, Peter's been stroking us is not in the meeting. His notes are from a debriefing given to him by almost certainly 99.9% Comey. And what do the notes tell us? Now let's look at these notes again. From what we've learned, that we now can establish that it was Comey telling Peter's been stroking us what happened. Second hand. Strzok wasn't in the meeting. Comey is telling Strzok what happened in the January 5th meeting. Totally different than Strzok being in the meeting and writing down what happened in the meeting. It's now got the filter of Jimmy the Weasel. And we know what a corrupt son of a bitch he is. And if you want to know what a slippery, slimy son of a bitch that Jimmy the Weasel is, let's go through now what Comey was telling Peter's been stroking us and see if we can smell the rat. I think you'll figure it out pretty quick. So what is Comey telling Peter's been stroking us that he's now writing down in these notes? He's telling them essentially that Obama gave the order to investigate Flynn. So in Jimmy the Weasel's cover your ass notes, Obama gave the order to investigate Flynn. But in Susan Rice's cover their ass letter, Obama's doing it all by the book. Well, a president, the separation of powers says that the White House, the executive branch, is not supposed to be involved in investigations as far as instructing the FBI to investigate certain people. There can be crimes, there can be issues, but even that is very touchy. It's not supposed to work quite that way. But clearly it was working that way in the Obama administration. Then we have Biden brought up the Logan Act. Jimmy the Weasel telling Peter's been stroking us that Biden brought up the Logan Act. The problem with that is that in silly Sally Yates' testimony, she says it was Jimmy the Weasel who brought up the Logan Act. So here we have, Peter's been stroking us his notes saying that it was Biden who brought up the Logan Act. We have Yates in sworn testimony saying it was Comey who brought up using the Logan Act. And then we have these additional notes uncovered by Catherine Herridge, which shows Peter's been stroking us, bragging that it was he who discovered the Logan Act doesn't apply to an incoming administration. See the problem? When everybody's trying to play cover their ass, it's hard to get to the truth because they're all lying. And of course, now we have Peter's been stroking us writing down that Comey's telling him that the call was legit. Why is Comey wanting Peter's been stroking us to write down that Comey's saying, hey, I told him the phone call with Kislyak was legitimate? Comey is covering his ass. These notes from Peter's been stroking us put the blame on Obama, not on himself, Comey. The Cover Your Ass letter by Susan Rice tries to take the responsibility for what happened in that meeting and who's directing it away from Obama to cover his ass, and her ass, by the way. But Comey's dictation to Peter's been stroking us gives Comey the cover of his ass. Because Comey's telling Peter's been stroking us, hey, I told Obama the phone call was legit. And then he writes down, Peter's been stroking us, writes down that Obama says that these are unusual times. And that has to do with the fact that Obama's saying, well, is there anything I shouldn't be telling the incoming administration? Yeah, you don't want to tell them that we're running a shadow investigation on them and a silent coup. That's what you don't want to tell them. When in fact, if it was just an issue with Flynn, and keep in mind, by this time they know Flynn's clean, okay? On January 4th, they're told Flynn is clean. Keep that in mind. When all this is going down, whether it's Susan Rice's cover her ass letter, or whether it's Comey dictating to Peter's been stroking us, cover his ass notes, it's all happening in the day after they've all learned that there was no problem with the call. They're pushing forward anyway. Now, what else was discussed in that meeting? Well, there's a reference in Peter's been stroking us notes that refers to something they're discussing, which is unclass, meaning unclassified. Well, what would that be? Well, it certainly would not be the intelligence community assessment, because that is classified. It would not be specifically the phone calls of Flynn and Kislyak, because they're already discussing that. And that would be, of course, classified. So the other thing that might have been coming into play that was very important at that time that wasn't necessarily classified would be the so-called Steele dossier. They were talking about the Steele dossier, Christopher Steele. Because that was the only thing they had at that point. The previous investigation had shown that Flynn had done nothing wrong. Flynn was the key to getting to Trump at that point because everything else had been blown up. Flynn was the last resort, the last hope. So they went back to the dossier. Because the dossier gives them Manafort, Carter Page, Papadopoulos, and other people. So they had to be talking about the dossier. So what does the Peter's been stroking us notes really do? Well, again, just like the so-called cover your ass letter written by Susan Rice, which tries to cover the ass of Obama and Susan Rice and that cabinet level people in the Obama administration, that's who that letter is trying to cover. Do it by the book. None of this is by the book, by the way. The very fact that Comey and Obama are having this discussion, along with Sally Yates, the fact that this discussion is occurring between the chief executive and the DOJ and FBI means it ain't happening by the book. The very fact that they're launching an investigation, which has already been determined where there's nothing there, is also not by the book. So, what are these notes that we just got from Peter's been stroking us? What are they really? Well, they are a cover your ass for Comey. Personally, they cover him. They basically give Comey both an alibi and they also give him the authority. So when he's sitting there being grilled by Durham or in front of a jury, he's going to say, hey, I had perfect authority. The president directed this. My boss directed it. Now, it didn't work in Nuremberg. Maybe he thinks it'll work in D.C. Probably will with a D.C. jury. But of course, this also gives him an alibi. So I look now, and we don't have all the information, but just what we're looking at this point, I conclude now that the Peter's been stroking us notes that he was writing down as they're being dictated to him by Jimmy the Weasel. This was Jimmy the Weasel's cover his ass letter. Everybody knew who was in that meeting that meeting was a problem. And so that's why everybody had to, when they come out of that meeting, go, okay, this meeting is going to be in the record. If this doesn't go right, this is going to be a real problem. I need to cover my ass here. That's why Susan Rice was told to write the letter to cover Obama's ass by Kathleen Remler, Obama's fixer. And Comey, being smart enough to realize that he'd just been involved in something he shouldn't be involved in, realized, oh, I better call that chimp over here, Peter's been stroking us, who's a sucker. Clearly they saw this guy coming. Comey put Peter's been stroking us in there for a reason. He knew that he was, this guy who had this kind of super cop attitude and hated Trump. And they knew it would be easy to put this guy in there and let him do all the dirty work. But here, Comey finds that he is compromised and that these other officials in the meeting, this is all going to be in the record, he has to cover his ass. So he brings in the smirking chimp, Peter's been stroking us, and dictates to him what was said in the meeting. So keep this in mind. We don't know if this is exactly what went down in that January 5th meeting. This is only Comey's version of what went down in that meeting. Two completely different things. Comey's CYA. Now, Susan Rice, and saying that Obama said to do it by the book, is a problem when compared to Peter's been stroking us's notes. Because what do we also learn from Peter's been stroking us's notes? And he's writing from what Comey is telling him, is dictating to him. Well, Strzok's notes suggest that Obama, according to Comey, directed which personnel to use. He said, make sure you put the right guys on it. That's a big problem. And again, it is Comey's way of covering his ass. Put the right guys on it. Well, the boss is telling me not only to continue on with this investigation into Flynn and Trump and his whole organization, his whole team coming in, keep investigating everything, but not only that, make sure you put the right people on it. That's definitely a no-no. So the do it by the book only works if you don't have Peter's been stroking us as notes, because that ain't by the book. In fact, that's not by the legal book. I don't know what book Susan Rice will be referring to, but when the president tells the FBI director to continue pursuing an investigation into an incoming administration, and specifically the National Security Advisor, when the FBI has already investigated and found that there is nothing there, specifically on Flynn, and the only thing they've got on the incoming administration is the dossier, which they know is garbage. And the president directs not only to keep investigating to the FBI director, but even tells him, make sure you get the right people. That means something. That means make sure you only get the people on the inside who know what it is that we're doing. Don't hand it off to the Eastern District of Virginia. Don't give it to some other agents at a bureau field office. It's got to stay on the 7th floor. It's got to be this Peter's been stroking us guy. That's the guy. Give it to him and McCabe. The do it by the book gets blown up with these notes. These notes, which Strzok is taking, which are being dictated to him by Comey. Comey blew up Susan Rice's cover your ass letter with a set of cover your ass notes. Everybody's trying to cover their ass. And in doing so, they're blowing up each other. So these people need to be questioned under oath in front of a jury after being indicted for their crimes. Because regardless of which of these two are lying or telling the truth, either way, everything that went down, the meeting itself, never should have occurred. By the book. And if they're going to go through with this, and you have Peter's been stroking us, patting himself on the back about the fact that he discovered that the Logan Act doesn't apply to incoming administrations, that would be blown up by, I would think, any DOJ lawyer or just by anybody sitting around the room at that time. We said, well, Pete, that's nice, Pete, but no, actually, the incoming National Security Advisor is allowed to talk to foreign ambassadors. So forget about that. So they're talking about the Logan Act, but they know that they have no case on the Logan Act. They know it's never been prosecuted. They know it dates back to the 1890s. 2 people have been accused of it a long time ago. No one ever convicted of it. It's a joke. It's considered to be unconstitutional. The idea that you would try to use that on the National Security Advisor incoming because he had a conversation with the Russian ambassador is crazy. It's crazy. And they know it. So it's not about the Logan Act. The Logan Act would have been a non-starter. So what was it? What else? What else is going on? Something that we don't know yet, that I hope we'll learn in the days or weeks to come. Because this, my friends, doesn't add up. Doesn't pass the sniff test. A lot of problems with this whole deal.